We're grateful that you're here this morning to be with us as we talk a little bit about this journey that we've been on for multi-siting. So a couple of things that we're going to do just to kind of give you a heads up of how this is going to go. We're going to just share some of the things about our story, a little bit about what God's done through Park. And I'll be asking some of these folks here who are on our panel. They'll introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what they do. And then we'll have some time for Q&A for you to, as you have questions that you're thinking through, working through, that you might want to present and ask, then we will be able to get to those. So hopefully we'll be able to motor through our time together, and it'll be profitable for you. If you guys don't mind, I'd love to just pray for us and open up. God, we recognize that you are on the move, that the work of the gospel is continuing to advance. We're not only here, but around the world. We're grateful, God, that we can be in this as co-laborers, brothers and sisters, for your fame, for your glory. We thank you for the opportunities to learn and grow together from each other. We pray that this gathering would be part of that work, and that ultimately we would see the name of Jesus exalted even more in cities across this country, but also across the world. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, as I said, so grateful to have you all here. I am one of those folks who serves with a lot of these guys, so I actually know them, but I'd love for them to be able to introduce themselves, and we'll let them share kind of what they do and what their roles are, and then we'll jump into some questions. So I'll just start off with this guy here, who I think he'll introduce himself now as he's looking at me like, what are you going to do?
Jackson Crum, lead pastor at Park, been here 14 years.
Kenson Lamb, I'm one of the location pastors, campus pastors of our location in the Bridgeport neighborhood. I've been pastoring in that location for about 8 years now, jumping here and there.
Jason Lalone, location pastor up in our Rogers Park network, and also am the network pastor at Park Community Church, seeking to help our other locations understand and work alongside, helping them know what it means to do ministry in their particular neighborhood.
I'm Jonathan Masters, the executive pastor. My wife and I have attended Park for 30 years. I've been on staff for 11.
Thanks for those introductions. I just want to let you all know that I serve at Park as a pastor of marriage and family ministry. Also have the privilege to serve on our executive leadership team at the church, as well as one of our elders. And so it's a privilege to be able to journey with these guys and walk with them as I've seen God work. And so I'm going to ask them a couple questions just to tell us a little bit about Park. So one of you guys just raise your hands if you want to take this. So the first thing, can you guys just give us a brief history, who Park is and how we kind of got where we are today? Maybe Jackson would take that.
30 years ago, this particular church, Moody, launched about 50 folks. There was a guy on staff who was the young singles pastor, and he wanted to reach the guys he was playing softball and darts with at one of the local bars. And he and Erwin had a conversation. Erwin was the lead pastor here, had a conversation about a contemporary service, and that wasn't going to happen here at Moody, just the way they were set up. And so he went back and said, hey, could we plant a church? And with the blessing of Erwin and the elders, they started right down the street, literally just a couple of blocks from here at Francis Parker School in Lincoln Park. And they were there for a number of years. There was a time in the early days when they thought they would even shut down the church. They were struggling, but they decided to keep it open. And a guy named Ray Carter came along and stabilized it for about 9 years, and then he left, and then I've been here 14 years. When we came, we were one church with 2 services meeting at Francis Parker. And through a series of events, we began to think about how to do church a little differently. How do we get churches into the neighborhoods? How do we become more accessible, knowing that those who aren't followers of Christ won't drive farther than they would to the jewel? And so how do we get the church toward them, knowing that culture was changing? So we began to develop a strategy of wanting to see a church in every what we call micro neighborhood in the city of Chicago. No way we would do them all. So we began with 5 in 5 years. And then the elders rethought through what the strategy needs to be, and then we decided on, let's do 20 by 2020. And so that's currently where we are. We're 9 churches right now. We're one church, I should say, in 9 different locations. We've planted a church in Logan Square called Church in the Square. We've changed our strategy a little bit, is that we are now far more engaged in church planting and partnering with churches around the city. We've engaged in 20 different church plants around the city. financially, coaching, material, praying for, and even at times standing up and saying to our folks, here's a new work. If you live in that area and this is a fit for you, go. And so that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of where we are. We started out in this very young. Our average age is 31. But we started out in this particular neighborhood, which is very, very young, and then we began to move into some more diverse neighborhoods. And let me have Jason explain to you a big change that took place for us back when we did our 5 and 5 that moved us in a kind of a new direction.
What change exactly are you wanting me to talk about?
I think Rogers Park would have been a big change.
Yeah. So I just poking at our lead pastor. So one of the changes that was made is, when we thought about how we were going to do church, especially when we were doing multi-site, is that it's just been a growing process for us as a church in particular of just understanding who we are and changing who we are in order to meet who we want to reach. And so one of the big kind of jumps for us culturally in the city is reaching a different part of our city in a different context was starting a location up in Rogers Park, which for some of you may know or may not know is either the first or second most diverse zip code in the United States. 85 languages are spoken in Rogers Park. 1 in 3 live in poverty. 1 in 3 are foreign born with a population of 70,000 people, which also includes Loyola University. And so it's kind of this what in the world, are we going to do this? And what was really cool about it is we've been up there for about 5.5 years now, and what that's done is it's helped shift and help us understand that, wow, we really got to contextualize and change our posture and who we are as a church in order to reach so many different kinds of people. It's what's very interesting about that is the journey that we've been on. I mean, our location up in Rogers Park is the mega church in Rogers Park, Evangelical Church. We've got about 275 to 300 adults and children on a Sunday meeting at Sullivan High School. And it's by far the biggest evangelical church in Rogers Park. Which shows, and the reason I only say that is because of the need. The next biggest evangelical church has about 100 people total. With all of those people, because it's been so difficult and how to do that. But what's been so beneficial about it is for us and how it's helped us shape and continue to shape who we are as a church and how we do church in the city. Is that if we can do church there, then by God's grace, we can learn how to do church anywhere and also partner with others who are doing it in different neighborhoods. So that was a big jump, as you can imagine, from downtown in the loop, so to speak, and predominantly where most of our folks were coming from, to this big jump in the far north side of our city, which has just shook up a lot of things, and as Jackson said, has changed a lot of the way we do things.
That's great. So you guys just, one of the things that just mentioning about where we are located, Moody, when they planted Park, the neighborhood that was planted when Jackson referenced Francis Parker, that's literally just a few blocks away. So Moody, and those 30 years ago, those elders chose to, hey, let's try to reach that neighborhood. And the reality is it's a more homogenous neighborhood, certainly economically and ethnically more homogenous. Upwardly mobile. So one of the things that, as we've talked a little bit about, you guys started to share in this, some of the challenges, what are some of the particular challenges that have come with being a multi-site church, particularly in the context of a city?
Thanks, Kenson.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. As you guys can imagine, you guys are in this room here probably because you have either done some multi-site or whatever, and it is incredibly challenging. Challenging for a couple of reasons. Is that especially if you're wired with an apostolic gift, you just like to take the hill and kind of be on your own. But when you do multi-site, that is not a freedom that you have. One of the things about multi-site is that learning, and I think this is good. This is good for the church. It's good for our sanctification, about what it means to be unified, about what it means to come together and serve in that way. So I think one of the challenges is kind of learning through that and learning what it means to be a good team player. What it means that sometimes, hey, you know what, we got to give some ground here for the sake of the greater initiative of what the church needs to accomplish. As a church, we've had a lot of growing pains around that. We've had some people on our staff who have been very strong apostolic leaders. And the multi-site model is very challenging to be in because there's such a clear vision that this is how church has to be. But then you got 6 other guys who are like, this is how we want to play ball. So it gets a little difficult in that way. So that's one of the challenges. Another challenge I think with multi-site too is that, especially in the context that we're in Chicago, Chicago is made up of neighborhoods. So we've been very careful that the way we do church is not by photocopying ourselves into neighborhoods and saying, you know what, we're just going to go ahead and just keep doing this. It just doesn't work because every single neighborhood here in Chicago is vastly different, facing vastly different issues. So even for myself in the Bridgeport neighborhood, it's primarily a working class neighborhood. People have lived there for generations. A lot of the immigrants are moving in because Chinatown, another thriving neighborhood, is right next to it. So a lot of folks move into there. So there's a whole bunch of issues there. But just a half a mile away, we have the South Loop neighborhood. And many of the folks who live here live in condos that will be twice my salary any given year. Like, these are people who are managing directors, executives, and they live just a half mile away. 2 vastly different populations. So the challenges that come with it is that church needs to be done differently, and also the way you do things. And the people that you bring in is very important in terms of who leads that. So for example, like a neighborhood like the South Loop location, it's a neighborhood that goes through a lot of transiency. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of wealth. So it brings on different challenges and different opportunities. There's a higher education level, so maybe apologetics works more in those type of neighborhoods. Where I'm from, we're a working class neighborhood. A lot of folks don't have the same resources. So an opportunity that I have is that when I provide just like hey, a free soccer camp, guess what? I have folks lining up to come to that because the parents there don't have those resources to drive up to the suburbs to have their kids go to this select academy for soccer or this and that. So these are things that you need to spend time learning about the neighborhood. But what makes it challenging at multi-site is that, as you can imagine, 9 locations, we sit all at the table, and we have 9 different stories that we're trying to work through and trying to find a way to best minister and reach out to. Yeah, question over there.
Yeah, can you help us understand the ways in which the contextualization takes place? Like, what does it affect the sermon? Does it affect how you do Sunday school? I mean, how does it affect everything? And if it affects many, many different things, can you also help us understand the kind of unity that you're finding across the campuses in the midst of the highly contextualized ministry?
Yeah, great question.
Jonathan might not explain decentralization and why.
Yeah, so that's something that we've obviously had to work through. When we started out, when we entered this multi-site journey 10 years ago, being one church in one location, just doing church is not easy, right? But as soon as you become multi-site, you introduce another culture into the conversation, even if it's very similar to the culture that launched it. But as we moved into different neighborhoods, we realized I would say up until a certain point, we continued to do church the way that we knew to do church, and then at some point you realize that just doesn't work in this context. And so we had some significant conversations that were, quite frankly, also challenging for our staff, right, which is another component of one of the challenges of multi-site, because you get used to doing your role one way, and then you introduce something new, and you have to learn how to do it a different way. And so our staff has to be very adaptive, nimble, open to change, things that just aren't necessarily intuitive or wired into all people. And so we have to learn how to lead through that. But going to different neighborhoods, we realized, first of all, we have a teaching pastor at each location. So right away, there's some uniqueness in the voice. We preach the same passage each week, but yet each voice that delivers the message is a unique voice. And we desire to reach each neighborhood, and Chicago is a city made up of neighborhoods. And so we desire that the pastor, the leadership, the church really gets to know that neighborhood and what are the unique needs and challenges of that neighborhood. And that just by its very nature, I think, forces us, right, to do things differently. What works in one neighborhood doesn't necessarily work in another. And so those have been challenges, but they've been great challenges because they've allowed us to realize, while we can't continue to do things the same way, when we do things differently, we all learn and grow from it. It can be challenging, it can be painful at times, but the end result is when we can contextualize through our the way that the things that we engage with and through serving, the way that we preach, the people that we're reaching under one banner of park. That's a pretty great thing, and it takes work, quite frankly, to be able to hold it all together. But
yeah. So trying to be as specific as we can with you. We all teach the same message. The guy right here, Steve, helps us think through what the passage is going to look like. But then we say, all right, you got to make it applicable for your folks. What's that look like? We all had the same children's curriculum up till about 18 months ago, and then we changed. We decentralized, and so now we say you pick the curriculum that's going to work best for you in your context. And so we began to give a lot of stuff away. Our mission, vision, values, all the same. How it might look in your neighborhood, your call, your choice. If you're going to go off the reservation, let's talk about it. Let's help me understand why you think you need to do this, that, or whatever. Our deacons are decentralized. Our elders, we have 2 elder teams. We have an elder team that is church-wide, oversees at 30,000 feet, and then we have elders on each location that are trained up and equipped and care for the issues on that particular location. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I'm sorry? Music. Oh, music. Also music. We used to all do the same music, found out that didn't work, and so we decentralized the music as well and said, what's best in your location? What's the best thing for you to do in your context?
So some other specifics. So definitely is, first of all, structurally there has to be some changes, and organizationally in how we do multi-site in the city because of the diverse cultures. So, but there's also had to be in leadership, all of that, other folks leading at the table. Some specific things, for example, I would talk about the Rogers Park Network and other locations are seeking to do, and they think about their community because even Chicago communities are still so segregated and so diverse. So one of some specific ways that we've contextualized and have sought to do it is we have a North Rogers Park location and a West Rogers Park location. North Rogers Park in our Rogers Park community is predominantly African American and 85% in poverty. So what happened is that the folks that were living in North Rogers Park were coming to South Rogers Park to come to church. But some of those were gang members. And so what we had to do is, because of the danger of the gang members coming down to our south part of our neighborhood, we had to bring them out the back door after service on Sunday, and it was just getting dangerous for some of our folks just even to do church. So we had to say, you know what, we got to come up to the neighborhood. So when we talk about contextualization, I want to first make this point very clear. It's a laying down of how you think how you should do church, and letting other people dictate how we should do it in order to reach a community. So we went up north to have a service up there. And then we have guys that are leading that respectively from the neighborhood that know the neighborhood better than anybody are helping lead the service. Secondly, West Rogers Park, if you're familiar with Devon Avenue, Little India, Little Pakistan, whatever you want to call it, West Rogers Park, that's where the nations have come. And so we have a guy there that's planning the church there, Phil Adams, doing a fantastic job. But we're doing a house church model. They're meeting in homes. And so the gathering that they have now, for example, they have Hindus and Muslim background believers meeting there. So we have to, and they would never do church like how you do it here at Moody Church. They have to do it in the home, family relationship. And we just have to do it differently. So when we talk about contextualization, it's a very, model all sorts of shift and working out all together, and it's informing how we do church as a whole in the city. So it's really exciting. A couple other things when I think about contextualization, purposeful. Kenson made a great point about the soccer camp. I dislike soccer. But Rogers Park, where the nations have come, or Kenson has Bridgeport, who they love soccer. So it's a laying down of, I want to play basketball, but playing soccer instead, to have that camp. It's how we do children's ministry. For example, usually in the white church, I'll say, we kind of get folks and sit them down in a classroom and a desk and got a chair. In Rogers Park, for example, to bring in the neighborhood, to keep them in mind rather than us, you have to have a big event. So you throw everybody in a room and they run around with hula hoops and they play basketball and they're on scooters and they're running around and it's an event, and then you have a 10 to 12 minute message that's very engaging. And so you got to think about ministry differently, thinking about the other. So there are some specific ways that we've had to think about contextualizing.
If I can also just make one more comment as well too. Also, depending on the neighborhood that you're in, you need to be ready in terms of the kind of commitment level that is required. So, for example, in some neighborhoods that might be more affluent, transiency is a much more realistic thing. So what that means is that you can plant a new church and kind of get away. In 3 years, it just kind of rotates. You're able to do ministry pretty quickly, do things pretty quickly, because for everyone, it's new. But in the rest of the Chicago neighborhoods, many of these neighborhoods are generational neighborhoods, which means that if you decide to go in there, you've got to go in there for the long haul, because what's going to be required to earn credibility is to show your presence over time. Now, we're not here just to drop in, do some nice things, and now come to church. But these folks have been living there for 3-4 generations would be like, show us that you're really, really in. So that's another dynamic to consider, that if you guys are thinking multi-siting, thinking about going to different neighborhoods, that's another dynamic to consider.
So if you think about your philosophy of expanding sites and your philosophy of multiplying churches and church planting, how do they differ? And you have 9 locations now. How scalable is that going to be in the future? Can you have 20, 30 sites? Is that the goal?
Oh, there you go.
Or is there a ceiling there? And as you think about planting churches, what is the differential between what you're hoping to accomplish in both, and how do they mend together?
That's a good question. Yeah, let me share a little bit, and then Jonathan probably should talk about this as well. 9 locations are hard to manage when they're 9 diverse locations. If they're all the same, if you're going, we're all doing the same music, we're all doing the same video, it's much different. But when we began to get in different neighborhoods and had to diversify, it's very different and harder, much harder to manage, much harder. I don't know if we can do 20. I really don't. And so that's one of the reasons why we've adjusted our strategy to do church planting. That doesn't mean we won't do any more locations. West Rogers Park, for instance, is something we've done. We're looking at a senior center, for instance, for a church that Jason has been engaged with. So we're not saying we'll never do any more locations, but we're finding church planting can get us to where we want to get much quicker. We especially want to move west and south in our city, the areas of our city that are greatly challenged. And we realize that we're going to have to partner with others who know those neighborhoods far better, which would be through church planting. So how can we get behind them and lend our resources and whatever materials and coaching we can do to make them successful? And we found that's a lot easier for us. It's a lot, if I can use the expression, a lot better bang for the dollar for us. Again, not going to give up on locations, but I'm not sure how many more we can really manage well at this point. Jonathan?
And just to follow up to that, just the partnerships of the church planting with other churches, is that through the venue of denominational or just network or relationship churches that you've established?
Great question.
Yeah, it's really through relationships that we've established. Us, along with Holy Trinity, Moody Church, and a couple other churches, started what's called the Chicago Partnership for Church Planting about 8 years ago. And so we've been able to be a part of seeing around 30 churches planted over the past 5 years specifically. And then we've recently become involved in a group called Catalyst Communities, which is basically churches from all corners of our city that desire to plant churches together. So it's something that's really neat, especially in a city like Chicago that is so has such a history of racial segregation and tension, and being able to come together with brothers and sisters from different denominations, from different ethnicities, and say we're going to plant churches together has really been a huge blessing to move this further along. One thing around locations that I think we're finding, certainly in our Rogers Park network, and why locations still could be part of the equation is because as that gets moved out to the networks, that's a way that, like even with Rogers Park, where there's multiple locations that are coming out of that network, and so they're effectively being managed up there, and so there's less of a managing from central or core, and so we really are starting to look more at the networks and what can the networks do together, and so that's still relatively new, but we've seen some great,
that's good insight.
great fruit from that. So
Good insight.
There's a question.
Please.
I was just going to ask, what are some best practices you guys have identified as far as keeping your locations aligned in the midst of incredible diversity of each location?
They have the pastors get together every Tuesday for a couple hours. Jason leads that meeting, and Steve is also our teaching pastor is involved in that, going over what we're teaching on and where we're going to be. That's part of it. They spend a lot of time together around common issues. They're a great encouragement to each other. That helps a great deal. And then we find that some of the other staff, like the children folks, get together and they chat, and the admins get together and they chat, so they talk and share best practices with each other. We found that to be very helpful. The hard thing, there's a plus and a minus. Some of our location pastors begin to get very myopic. This is just my thing right here, and they forget they're part of something bigger. And we have to constantly remind ourselves that it's both and. You're part of something bigger, but yet you've got this work right here. And so that's our job as a leadership team, to make sure that we realize, we're together. We just had our 30th anniversary right here, pulling all our locations together, remind us we're still one church. We still have one mission, vision, and a set of values. We're still going in one direction. So we pull together as a staff team once a month, everybody. If we pay you, we want you to show up. And we talk about those things. What do we have in common? Where are we going together? So it's that constant balance of between, yes, you've got something you need to lead, but you're part of something bigger.
Do you have, along those lines then, right, do you do stuff together collectively with 9 diverse locations? Do you have opportunities where all of Park comes together? And if so, what's that like?
We do a baptism in the summer right here at the lake, right not too far from here. That's an everybody show up. We did for a while have a celebration that particular day where all the locations showed up. We did the 30th anniversary. We have been talking as a lead team, we've been talking about that's probably something we need to do every year. We need to have a year. I think Jason suggested that every year we come together somewhere, all 9 locations, to remind ourselves we're part of one church. But we haven't done a lot of those things. Oh, that's true. Global and renewal.
Another thing, that's really good, Jackson. One of the things that we also just got across of citywide is that what's been really exciting is also playing within what the Spirit of God is doing all across the city as well. In partnerships, one of the things that we just got done doing in the summer was called 40 Days of Presence, where our locations in our specific regions had the opportunity to partner with each other and with other churches as well to do mission together, so to speak, get outside the walls of the building. So as you know, anytime that you do mission together, that really fortifies the relationship.
Can you talk a little bit about the process to prepare the sermon? If it's one sermon, how do you prepare in terms of time frame, and how long in advance you're preparing that, from whom, and how do it get communicated to the rest of the pastors?
I'll take this. Steve, our teaching pastor, is sitting right over there. Steve, you can just wave hi to everybody. There. Actually, Steve, why don't you just go and take it, since you're right there. Yeah. Why don't you share how the process works for the staff?
This is working out. Steve, why don't you just take that since you lead that?
Yeah, so I spent a good amount of time just doing research and putting together kind of an outline reading commentaries, studying for myself probably about 10 hours before I present to the campus pastors on Tuesday. And so some of those guys have already done some of their work ahead of time, and so we just talk through and try to, where I've got a direction kind of set where we're headed or where I think that we should head, sort of the ballpark of this is the big idea, this particular passage, this is what I think we should all hit on. And we sort of try to corporately get together on, I see that as a part of the passage, and that's what we'll teach together. So Jackson and I will sit together a few months in advance and say, man, I think Galatians, I'll pitch Galatians to the location pastors and why, and then we'll get on the same page together. We're gonna teach through Galatians. Jackson and I will work together to figure out what do the weeks look like through the calendar on that. So this weekend I'm preaching Galatians 3:1 through 14. All of us are preaching Galatians 3:1 through 14. We walked through Galatians 3:1 through 14 on Tuesday together. I gave my big idea and we talked around it. And then at noon today we're going to go to a luncheon and talk about an Explore God series for the new year together, and so we'll then present probably Explore God as the new series for the new year. And so we work about a semester in advance to present it to all the guys, and then we work through it together and determine that's what we want to teach together.
They would love for us to plan a year out at a time. They would love for us. I see one of our staff sitting back here that would love for us to plan a year in advance. I'll tell you why we don't. Is we're trying to be nimble. We're trying to be nimble to understand our needs going to bubble up in our church that we need to address. And so we plan a semester out, but we try to be a little flexible as we think about what's next to address the needs that are coming up in our church. Nothing wrong with planning a year in advance. That's just what we have chosen. And it's a constant tension for us as a result.
When you guys have so much diversity, you've given up a lot of the advantages of multi-site. So I'm really intrigued by how you're talking about trying to get into the community and serve the community, and at the same time, you've given up the advantages of doing things uniformly across. How are you doing that? How does this make work? It seems like you guys got a lot of work involved in each site, and yet you're getting the community and serving. Help us understand.
I would probably say that we're not giving up an advantage. We are actually taking advantage of the opportunity. And what I mean by that is because of doing ministry in the city, where from neighborhood to neighborhood is so different, the needs are so different, the culture is so different. Actually, it's advantageous for us to get into those neighborhoods to put on a much fuller display of God's scope of redemption in the city.
You still only have 24 hours in a day.
Exactly, which is so much of the joy. So, because we're in different neighborhoods, the location pastors, the lead teams, the ministry teams, they have to be thinking about it differently and not uniformly, so to speak, in their strategy of ministry. To Jackson's point, we hold our vision, mission, and values all together, but we contextualize that. We communicate it the same way, but we contextualize it in a way in how it looks and how it's played out. And to be honest with you, that's so much of the journey of the Christian life, is the seeking to deny ourselves for the sake of the gospel so that others can hear the good news. Because if we did this thing all uniformly, we might as well just plant locations down in the loop. We would never get out.
Why not do it independently? So it doesn't require something.
Yeah. Because that's thank you, Donna. Why we don't do it independently? Because why would we do it when we can do it together? Because of what it shows. It's the heart of the mission and what it shows. The diversity of God's redemption and of all people from every tribe, language, people, and nation, that reality of where we're going, our future hope and gathering. When we're able to put that on display now in our city together as one in unity, it really exalts God and His goodness and His grace and His work in the world. And so it takes a little bit more time on the front end, and it's hard work, but we think the benefits down the road are going to be well worth it. Also because of what our cities are becoming as well, we have to do it like this.
If I can jump in on it for a little bit too, I think what a part of that too is that as you guys are looking, potentially if you guys are lead pastors here and you guys are looking at multi-site and bring in guys to help lead stuff like that, one of the high values is like, can he come in and do they value collaboration? Because it's a key thing. That's one of the things why we love, even though we can all be independent, and Jackson's actually approached many of us as location pastors, why don't you just go do your own thing? And we're like, no. We think we're stronger as a team, like collaborating and working through issues, sharing ideas together. But I know enough pastors, that's not always a high value for all pastors. So that's very key that if you do a multi-site model, like does someone come in, are they a learner, do they want to collaborate, is that a high value, a team player? Also as well too, as a church, we've actually experienced both ends. We've been in this multi-site journey for about a little over 8 years. For the first half, we were one church. Like we did everything the same way. There are advantages to that. You move much quicker. Decisions happen much faster.
Top down.
It's top down. The budget is. Like you get the you have more control over your budget and so forth. You know what I mean? Like the communications team, they're so happy because everyone has to speak with the same language. But the problem with that is that when you launch a church with that kind of model, in essence, what you're saying to the neighborhood community, at least here in Chicago, is that instead of being more of a go and tell type of church, it's more of a come and see. Like this is who we're going to be. So if you want to be with us, you have to adapt to us and be with us. The reason we've switched the model that we've switched to is that it is slower, but slower in a good way because it makes us focus on context, on relationships. Yes, it does take more time to do, but that's not always a bad thing. Especially in some of our neighborhoods, that's exactly the very thing that we need to do to be able to show, to show the power of the gospel, to show the faithfulness and the transformation that the gospel brings. So we've been able to experience both ends of that. And in our context here in Chicago, we have decided that, because of just how different our neighborhoods are, we've got to go in with this more decentralized model, but yet unified. And if I can make one more statement too, is that we've had a lot of suburban churches who want to come in to Chicago. They've multi-sited in maybe 10 different locations in the suburbs, and they're doing great. But they've tried to come into the city, and many of them have had to close their doors because what they're trying to do is they're trying to kind of force their model into the city. What's interesting is that where some of these church plants are working are in some of the more affluent neighborhoods. Why? Because the suburban neighborhoods are more affluent. So the culture change is not very big, right? But when they try to get into more of the ethnic neighborhoods, they can't do it, So you just got to keep that all in mind. And that's why we've chosen the model that we've chosen, just because there's been a lot of growing pains with that, that's come with that.
I want one final thing on that. Thinking about future, this is what our cities are becoming, so we have to do it like this in order to be a part of what God's doing in our cities. He's bringing the nations, immigration and migration, and people from the rural parts of our country, they're coming to the cities. And so as the cities grow and even become more and more diversified, we have to be prepared for that for the next 20, 30, 40 years so the gospel still has a witness in our cities. We have to begin to change now or we'll get snuffed out, so to speak. So it's an intentionally focusing on the long haul as well of seeking to do what we're trying to do by God's help.
Please.
Do you have location-based, non-vocational elders? And if so, what's their role with the whole kind of central?
Yeah, the way we work it is that each location has 3 elders, one of which is a pastor, the other 2 are lay. And then we have this centralized elder team that oversees. And so right now we have 2 spots open on that centralized elder team that we're going to make sure we add location elders to, so we have a good voice, a good mind of what is taking place and how to respond better to the needs of the location.
I serve on a network board, so it's a board type of question. Budget. One budget. Right? And then who hires and fires pastors and staff?
Jonathan.
So we do have one shared budget. I would recommend, there's a book called Multi-Church for those of you who are considering multi-site or in multi-site. It's very helpful, frames out some of these conversations. But yeah, we had one shared budget and it's still one shared budget. But we effectively 2 years ago flipped from core or central controlling 2/3 of it to now the locations controlling 2/3 of it. So that's a pretty significant shift. And with that, of course, with the finances, that also was in conjunction with a lot of decisions that were made. And so we still have one central HR function because, as you know, there's a lot of laws are changing all the time, right? And so we want to make sure that all of our locations have expert HR help, but yet we've pushed out more of the decision making to who they want to hire. The locations were always involved in the hiring process, but now they take the primary lead on it in conjunction with our HR person, just to make sure that we're always in compliance, etc. And the location pastors are the ones that ultimately will hire them, the individuals now. If it's a pastor level joining our pastoral team, then that would be a decision amongst the pastors and the elders that would work together to make that decision.
This whole decentralized thing is that Jonathan has been in conversation with someone, and he began to say, if we have a weekly meeting, began to go, I wonder if, and we began to go, this is going to create a lot of havoc, and it did. It did. To go from centralized to decentralized, it has been some of the most 18 miserable months of my life. Difficult, but incredibly helpful. And Jonathan has kind of led this, spearheaded this thing, the decentralization of finances and control and decision making. Been really helpful for us. We found very quickly the locations got incredibly healthy. An interesting thing is our central location at one time, the one that was central, where we're all housed out of, suffered and is yet to rebound. All the other locations have grown, for the most part have grown and have done very, very well. But what we call near north location, near north neighborhood right over here, is still recovering because of all this. Because everybody's housed in that one place, and when the changes had to make, it affected them. And we're just beginning after 18 months to begin to feel the shift back to a healthy place together as a team.
Before we made that switch, we talked to a lot of people in our church and a lot of our leaders, and now that each location has their own budget and they're responsible for it, which is all good stuff, right? They become better stewards, they think more intentionally and strategic about how to spend resources. But we also knew that people in the seats that were part of the local community, when they found out that more of what they were giving to the church was having an impact in their local neighborhood, that's where we've seen people respond in generosity, because before it was sending it to the one large organization, which was just harder to cast vision around, right? And so now that they know that more of their money that they give is staying locally, we've seen very positive results from that.
Yes.
Could you describe your process for researching and evaluating new sites, new locations, both in terms of raising up leaders that would be potential location pastors, and both in evaluating physically where the meetings would take place?
Yeah. So a lot of prayer. This is a good question. The Spirit of God is the one moving and directing. He's going to where He's already going to work, and He's calling out people into that work. And so what we've found is that when we're planning other locations or want to be involved in another church plant, partnering, that the work of prayer, where we find God, we're depending on Him centrally, and we find Him as we're delighting Him, and He's directing our path. And so what happens is that some people within a congregation or one of our locations, they'll just start to have an inkling or a desire to go to a particular location. Or like, man, what about that neighborhood? And so immediately the antennas go up and it's like mobilize. Okay, who else would have this desire? Because usually if the Holy Spirit's at work in somebody, he's tapping somebody else on the shoulder too. What about this neighborhood? And what happens is we've seen just that God has brought together this unity and formed teams around this. And then secondly, the process is what I would call exploration or community and cultural analysis, where you do a deep dive into where you're going to seek to plant and what God is doing. And that can take months, 8 months to a year, to get to understand the community that you're in, ask a lot of questions, and ask for help to understand the culture. Secondly, it's theological reflection. Of all the information that you got, how do we do church? How do we do this? What is our strategy for ministry, so to speak? So, for example, just one simple example of that. For North Rogers Park, how do we communicate the gospel effectively to 85% are in poverty, predominantly African American? How do you shape the message? And so, for example, let's say you're talking to a 13-year-old young boy that's out in the park playing basketball. He wants to shoot baskets with you, and you begin to share about the gospel. The conversation is around that God is a good father. Not that God is judge and he's just, and you don't start there. God is a good father because if you know the community, you know that there's fatherlessness. And so there's a father that you can trust, and you build a relationship and you grow. But you only can get that by a deep dive in cultural and community analysis, and then doing theological reflection and how you do ministry. It's vital. Then secondly, you move into starting getting your teams, starting forming your teams. By the way, you're still praying. You're like praying constantly, God help. And begin to mobilize them, put them in the right spots for flourishing. That's where leaders we've seen develop. We take them all along in the process because the leaders are following all along in the process. Putting them in the right spots, empowering them to flourish so they can use their gifts, their spiritual gifts, for the kingdom. And then lastly, we want to always enforce that this is not where it stops. Not with this plant. Where are we going next? Answering the question, God, where are you guiding us next? So the DNA is already in us as a church. We're not thinking about when we stop here, when we plant here, this is where we're stopping. We're thinking about always, God, where are you going? Where are you directing? And so it keeps it embedded in that process. And all of those things in the city, by the way, it's not necessarily a step-by-step process. Those are things that you are doing continually, always in the life of the church, because the city's always changing. And so it helps inform. So we're always thinking about how do we do things differently? How do we need to change?
And if I could add, just about every place we wanted to go, God shut the door and we ended up somewhere else. We would pick a place early on. John and I would talk about this, where we need to go. That door slammed, and then something else opened up. So we've learned now just to have an open hand around this.
How many of the locations, if any, were mergers of existing congregations, and what's the process?
So merger, of course, is a legal term. The term that we use is no, not acquisition, an adoption, right? Because that's truly what we desired, right? To create and present a biblical picture, right, of what we desired, that there'd be just as we've been adopted, that it would truly be like an adoption. Answer your question, 4 of our locations started out as adoptions, and those are very unique, and those take a special leader to help lead through those. If any of you have ever gone through them, you know what I'm talking about, because you've got an existing culture that's already there, and you're bringing in new culture, and you're trying to discern who are the leaders there that will embrace and fit into what we're trying to accomplish. And so it's a beautiful journey, and it can be a hard journey as well. But,
2 with buildings, 2 without.
Yeah. 2 of the church mergers, adoptions had existing facilities, and 2 did not.
Okay. Did you retain any of the senior leaders of those 4 churches, and how many of them were healthy, and it was just better together than necessarily fledgling
That's a good
and
question.
needed direction?
Yeah, so there's a lot written on this, and some people will say you never should. Like we spoke to many consultants who'd say you should never keep the leadership on when there's an adoption or merger done. And yet, I don't know, maybe we're crazy enough to think that we could try it because of the circumstances, the godly men that we knew these men to be. And so we did try it, and I think each of them have transitioned within a matter of time, whether it be a year or two. Just the realization that the culture that we brought in just wasn't the perfect fit for them, and so some of them been hard conversations. Some of them were very easy for them to see and for us to see, but we typically desire to see, can we make this work? Is there a place on our team for them to fit? So that's typically where we start. But yeah, they can be very hard, and they can be very fruitful conversations as well, though, too.
Yeah, if I can just make a mention, the word adoption is actually very important because when we first started, we used the word merger. That actually ended up creating some problems for us because the church that was being brought in, when you hear the word merger, you're thinking, all right, what we're going to do here now is kind of merge cultures, figure out a way where we can work better together. We just learned that just can't work. Just like in an adoption, we love you, but you're coming into our house, our rules, the way we do things. Now, it doesn't mean that we're just going to just like roll over them type of thing, but in terms of just kind of running it well and being able to lead it, we've very specifically used the word adoption, that when we come in, you're coming into our values, our vision, our mission. And that is tough. That is tough. I had a chance to work with one of my peers who was a pastor of one of these mergers, and it's tough because it's a whole different culture. You've been leading this thing for the last 10 years, and you've gotten to a point where with enough humility you've asked for help in saying that we need Park Community Church to come in. But when you see all the changes start to happen, when you start to see all these folks coming in that what's happening, it is a hard adjustment. It's a very hard adjustment.
So what would be the 3 to 4 top DNA markers that are non-negotiable that are part of becoming a part of the adopted process that are clear?
I should say that Jonathan can answer that. New Life Community Church here in town has done this really well. They have a playbook now. So if a church reaches out to them, they kind of plop that playbook down and go, this is what it looks like. Here's what it means. Here's all the issues that we've thought through. Here's all the things we've seen in the past. They've done 20 some odd of these. And so for more information, they would really be helpful. They've been great friends to us through the years of us having questions. But Jonathan, why don't you talk about what are those top several things that we'd say non-negotiable?
Well, I think you heard some of it already. We're looking. We want to be a part of a movement, and so we desire that they want to be a part of a movement. And a lot of times that's something that the pastor may have, right? It may be something that was true of them at one point, or it may just be aspirational, right, at some point because they've been doing church, and of the 4 that we've been a part of, none of them were flourishing when we ended up meeting. So that of course is just a different situation than a coming together with two churches that are flourishing. And also collaboration, and again, a lot of times we say that we desire that, right, and yet for some of us we're just more wired, right, as a solo pastor. Nothing sinful, wrong in that, but we're looking for people that want to be a part of a team and collaborate and share our mission and vision, and so at least in answering from my side of it, right, the other gentlemen would have their own better, unique answers to this, but I think they desire, they've been in a hard place for long enough that they see us as being able to help them, And I think one of the hard things is just being able to say, wow, but I really I desire this for the body of Christ, and yet this could cost me my job, right? And that's just a very difficult place to get for a pastor, to be that open and to just say, Lord, you know, if this is the right thing and yet it costs me my job, so be it. But that's the posture that we kind of take with our locations, which I would just encourage anybody that does multi-site to hold it like this. Because for us, if they're a park location, we genuinely and truly believe that we're better because of them, and God willing, they're better because of us doing this together. But if there's something that comes up that's just abundantly clear to us that we're hindering the mission of what God has called them to, then we will gladly release them. And so that's just we really want to have that posture and not just talk about it, but actually do it. And
we got time for a couple more because we're coming close. So
I was just going to ask, like, from a centralization, but also location specific, like, how does that work with respect to this, any kind of a discipleship process you guys have? I mean, is it unique to each location?
Yeah, a discipleship process is unique to each location. So, what and
do you share anything like in common? Okay.
Yeah, no. That's a really good question. I think it's one thing we're working through, because when we were centralized, so to speak, we were all working on kind of the same kind of mode of process of discipleship, from entrance into the front door to becoming a disciple and going. But now, since we've decentralized, now it's kind of each location is kind of as doing their kind of, not necessarily their own thing, but best ideas of everybody shared together, and we collaborate on that and share. But it's definitely switched since we decentralized.
Great. So one more.
You guys seem to be intentional about the kind of language that you use and what that communicates. I think that's really important. Words are important. And I've heard you using a phrase that I'm a campus pastor at Christ Church Highland Park. We really appreciate the relationship you guys have had with Christ Church, and been very generous and helpful. But I haven't heard you use the word location before. Is that new, and is that an intentional choice of words, and what are you trying to communicate by using that? I mean, a lot of multi-site churches use sites or campus, and I hear you using the phrase location pastor, new location. Has that been intentional?
That's a good question. Yeah, it has been intentional. So we're still working through it, but we still campus flares up every once in a while. But yeah, and a lot of that was just, I think, probably, again, thinking around the city. Because how folks think about it in the city is because we have so many educational institutions. Sure. Like, oh, your campus? So you're at, what college are you at?
Right, I say I'm a campus pastor.
Exactly.
Oh, you're the college
really?
pastor.
So you're at Loyola Chicago? Oh, gotcha, okay. So that's really been a lot of it, location, rather. And then also, what that does is that communicates a kind of the decentralization as well, more than the...
A little more ecclesiology.
Yeah.
Right. I like that.
Any others? All right. Well, it's 11:30, which is we made it to an hour by the nose. I know that any of these guys would love to chat with you. We'll be up here. Pastor Steve's here, our teaching pastor as well, and we also have some of our staff, our production team, and our communications team that are back there. I'm just pointing them out, Joe and Alan. Who, if you are looking for some of those questions around how the impact with those inner workings can impact those particular ministries, they would be helpful.
Our family counseling. Yeah.
Premarital good stuff. So we'd love to chat with you. Anyway, guys, thanks so much. Ladies, thanks for being here, and hope that you will enjoy the rest of your day in the conference.
Thank you. Great job. Thanks.